My next recipe is packed full of wild meat, and I want to use it to explore our national tradition of filling pies with seasonal game.
When it comes to food, everything has its season. And with the onset of supermarkets, it's difficult to tell when one season ends and another one begins. But seasonality does not only affect fruit and veg, it also affects meat.
Hopetoun House is a 300-year-old Scottish stately home near Edinburgh. The lucky chap who calls this modest abode home is Lord Hopetoun.
Lord Hopetoun, nice to meet you.
Good to meet you.
What a fantastic looking place.
Thank you very much.
I don't envy your electric bill, if I'm honest. Or your gardening bill. I think it took me about half an hour to come up here.
We head off on a tour of the estate. Hopetoun House is set in over 6,000 acres of beautiful grounds. It's a mixture of farming and parkland, teeming with all kinds of wild game.
Coming down to bare basics, what is game?
Game is a natural resource that is hunted or shot. It's wild birds, often reared as well to supplement the numbers, but it's wild birds, wild beasts that are hunted.
And so what sort of game do you have on the land there?
So around here we've got pheasants and partridges, we've got rabbits and hares, deer, largely roe deer wild on the estate, but we've also got fallow and red deer within the grounds. Woodcock coming into the woods, and we have grey partridge here, but not nearly as many as we used to.
Back at the house, there are many historical treasures, but I'm particularly interested in a rather unique household collection. These are precise records written by housekeepers from the mid-1700s. They document all the ingredients sourced from the estate that went into the kitchens and onto the dinner table.
Well, here are some volumes from the Hopetoun muniments, and showing some of the foods that were eaten in past times. This, for example, is the year 1754 to 55. For example, there's a certain amount of lamb bought early in the year. Killed a lamb being the first of my lord's own.
That was the first lamb that was actually
from the estate.
Killed and eaten here, probably eaten certainly within a certain period of time.
Oh,
but
yes.
Again, you got spring lamb.
Yes, very much so.
But what you can see here very clearly is some of the seasonal elements. So at the moment we're in October 1895, and you can see roast partridge making its way onto the menu for October.
Yeah.
By the time you then shift into November 1895, you're moving into roast pheasant, which of course has come into season at the beginning of October, but is starting to appear by November.
Yeah.
And as you work your way through the year and you come out the other side into something like April, then you're suddenly moving into things like pigeon. So that would have been fresh pigeon that had been fed up over the winter and was just ready.
These cooks couldn't have made a pigeon pie at any old time of year. They had to use whatever game was in season. So it wasn't the recipe books that dictated the pie, it was the calendar. Nowadays, it's not so restrictive. Seasonal produce is still available.
The seasons are still there if we want to follow them.
Yeah.
And that's one of the benefits of the farmers markets and farm shops and so on.
If you want to be local, and if you want to be seasonal, and if you want to be fresh, that's one of the ways of doing it.
Lord Hopetoun still has to manage the estate's game according to the seasons and employs Paul as his gamekeeper. Paul explains the importance of maintaining the local wildlife and habitat.
7 days a week, 365 days a year, you are trying to keep this place just right.
So for you, it's the breeding, it's the rearing, it's the looking after and nurturing of the birds themselves.
It's not just the birds. You can get a lot of ground cover now. You've got fantastic insect life. You've got butterflies. You've got everything. The place is alive.
So
when you can see all this, it's the greatest job in the world.
But what I really need to know is what's available and when.
So woodies, pigeon, rabbits, hare, all year round?
Hares have a season now. They've just introduced a season.
Oh, really?
They go out in end of February. They've got basically the same as a pheasant, and they come in 1st October.
So 1st October to the end of February?
Yeah, they're protected through the summer for the breeding season.
Well, that's interesting, because my whole thing is to look at seasonality of game, to see if it's still alive today. And yes, it is.
Yeah.
But because of freezers,
Yeah.
then technically we could eat it all year round.
The game laws basically were made before freezers and things like that. Whereas now you can eat game all summer long if you want. You know,
So
you can-
that's the
as
thing.
long as it's shot in season.
Yeah.
All the wild meat from the estate goes to Hopeton's resident butchery. And of course, the game which Butcher Derek sells changes according to the time of year. I want my game pie to reflect the current season, so I've come to taste the different meats that are at their best right now.
So I see you've got some meat there. Can we try some of these? We've got pheasant.
Today, it's early in the pheasant season, so the meat is very fresh.
I've tried pheasant that's been hung for a couple of weeks. Very different flavour. But that's beautiful. This is rabbit.
Rabbit, that's right.
It's got more depth of texture on that one.
Yes, it's more substantial meat.
Mm.
You know what I mean?
The partridge.
Partridge.
I think the partridge is one up on the pheasant.
I prefer the partridge.
Do you?
Yeah.
I'm going to be making a hand-raised pie, and I'm using a hot watercress pastry.
Yeah.
And what I'm looking for is 3, bits of game to go inside my pie. What would you recommend first to go in the pie? 3 of
Well,
them.
obviously, your venison is your top one for a pie, basically. You can get your venison there as well. But you have to balance the flavour in it. So I would say something like the partridge and a rabbit. Just your rabbit will hold the flavour a wee bit. It's a firmer meat. Whereas, as you say, the partridge is a delicate one.
And I would agree with that. I think that's a terrific choice. I think the venison, you've got a nice dark meat. You've got something that's very pale in a partridge. You've got a rabbit that's somewhere in between. So actually the 3 are going to look good together, as well as providing a very balanced range of flavours. So I think that's a great choice.
Okay. I think I've got my 3 pieces of game. Venison, rabbit, and partridge.
Spot on.
Fantastic. So I'm all set to make my raised game pie, and our estate butcher Derek has come down from Scotland to make sure I do his meat justice. Hello, Derek.
Hello, Paul.
Lord Hopeton couldn't come with us. I take it he's a busy man.
He's a very busy man,
I understand that. He's looking after that house. Cleaning all those windows must take him forever.
It won't take a while.
Now, all the meat that's reared, all the animals that are on his estate, all ends up in your butchery.
correct.
That, I think, is fantastic anyway, because you've got Providence straight away, so it's only, what, 5 miles, 2 miles down? Well, not even that.
Not even that.
A game pie is much easier than it looks, and whenever you decide to make it, I suggest you choose meats with different colours and textures to keep things interesting. So if I run through what the meats are that I'm putting in my pie, I've got partridge here,
That's right.
venison, rabbit, and I've got belly pork here. Again, a little bit of fat to sort of bring that fat, because most of the meat there is quite lean.
That's right.
So what I'm going to do is pop all this meat into a large bowl. There's my partridge going in. It's very lean, that, isn't it?
It's breast meat.
And the venison, so that was breast of partridge. I don't suppose you're going to get much else out of it, really, are you?
There's not that much on the partridge, I'm afraid.
And here's the rabbit.
You find the big differences is ours is wild as well, so there's a big difference between
it's livid.
There's it was livid when it was shot.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've got my belly pork going. I think that little bit of addition of fat should make a difference.
It should do.
I've got some parsley, some thyme going in there as well. I've got some Madeira. Again, that little bit of sweetness I think could come out with the venison as well. A little bit of seasoning, some salt.
I chop up some garlic and add it to my game filling,
Throw that straight in.
along with some mace and allspice to give it real depth of flavour.
And that is the basic ingredients for the game pie. Now, the reason why we chose this meat is because it is of its time right now.
In the estate we have a fallow deer which just started to be on season, but the roe deer, they change from bucks to does, obviously, because they didn't shoot the does when it's breeding time, basically.
And where does the flavour come from? Which one do you prefer?
Well, to be honest with you, the bucks can be if it's just after the breeding season, you have to watch, because you have to give them a couple of weeks to kind of recover, if you know what I mean, after the exercise of the breeding season. So you find it's slightly better after a couple of weeks, the bucks.
Oh, right.
And they kind of go into hiding, actually, according to the gamekeeper. They kind of go missing, they run away and hide and stock up on things.
I bet they do. Right.
Whatever meat you're putting in your pie, it's going to need a good strong pastry, and a robust hot water crust is the answer. I use 50-50 strong and plain flour with some butter rubbed in to start. But the key is this: lard, melted in hot water. This soaks straight into the flour and makes it strong.
So what I've done is added all the lard, the water to this mixture with the flour, and then begin to just fold it into the middle for now. Begin to build up the pastry. It's still quite warm, so initially use your spoon, and then when it's warm enough to touch, then get your hand in there. And all I'm doing is folding from the outside with my knuckles into the middle. And again, it's just building up the little bit of gluten that is in the strong flour and turn it to a nice smooth pastry. It's a double action actually. The first thing you're doing is actually mixing all the ingredients in together, and the second thing is you're just building up a little bit of resistance, a little bit of gluten in there as well.
I'm rolling out my pastry to line an 8-inch tin to make a large family-sized game pie, but you can make individual ones if you want.
Do you not have to grease the tin or anything
No,
like that?
well, all the fat's in there.
Aye.
All the fat's in there. You got lard in there, you got butter in there, so it creates its own shine, a hot water crust pastry. If you think of pork pies, you wouldn't line a pork pie tin.
No.
It's the same
Really
thing.
very
really.
similar, is it?
Yeah,
In pastry.
exactly,
wise,
same
right?
pastry. So let's look at that. If I bring my tin over, yeah, that will go up the sides and on the top. So get your pastry, pop your tin down there, throw it over, get it inside. Just take a little bit over the top of the lip so you know that's what you've got to work with. And again, slowly move round, pushing it down to the bottom.
You need to work quickly with hot water crust pastry because the texture changes as it cools and it can become more crumbly. Make sure you don't have any cracks or holes in the pastry before you add the filling.
So you wouldn't cook any of that at all off first? You would just
What
cook
we're
it in
going
the
to
pan?
do, we're going to cook this quite. It's a hot water crust pastry.
Right,
It'll take a bit of
okay.
heat for considerable
Right.
time. It's going to take some cooking. I mean, it's nearly 2 hours, and that will allow, because it's quite lean meat as well.
I was going to ask if you put any stock or anything in that to help
No.
that. No.
No. So the whole thing, that's going to produce the fat. I'm hoping the fat
fat,
from
the
the
belly
pork belly will release,
Right. Okay.
and then the lean meat will cook as well.
Mhm.
Now, when you're looking at the meat that we've chosen in there, the partridge, the venison, the rabbit, coming into winter time, what other meats are going to become available?
Well, your pheasants is the main game bird shooting over that season. They'll go all the way through to the end of January.
Now, what I've done is I've rolled out the lid.
Once you've added the lid, you can then trim the edges and crimp.
Anything left over, Derek, can always turn into a pork pie.
Finally, pierce the lid and add an egg wash.
And brush it well all over the top.
Put it in the oven at 200 degrees Celsius for 30 minutes. Then turn the temperature down to 180 and bake for a further hour and a half.
Here's one that has been baked. What do you think of that then, Derek?
It looks lovely.
Now that is a proper game pie. It has the partridge, it has the venison, has the rabbit, all the way from Lord Hopetoun.
So that's my pie from the Hopetoun estate. But you can use the same recipe for whatever meats are best in season, whenever you fancy giving it a whirl. Talk to your butcher and experiment with your own version.
Derek, you'll have to wait a little bit longer before we get a chance to eat it.
Look forward to it.